Mrs. Shees was so happy that she could finally marry Mean Matt. Dyke Mary was Mrs. Shees' favorite grandkid. She would always milk Mrs. Shees because Mrs. Shees was a cow, but she would no longer have to do that due to Matt being her husband and all. But then the principal, outgoing Oliver, was always hanging out with the minors. Oh, but then you got Cutie Carter fired just because he was with Linda, and Principal, outgoing Oliver, wanted to be with Linda. Going back, after the fight, Linda was so impressed by Middle School Miller that she kissed him on the spot. We can't tell you which spot, however. It is a very appropriate spot, so it's okay. But you can ask Creepy Cohen. He was watching the whole time. Miles was so happy that he could finally be with Linda. Middle School Miller, and we're so happy that they decided to go to Egypt together. There they were at the pyramids. When they saw Behavioral Brennan, and Brennan was in a squirrel suit jumping off the pyramid. It was a flying squirrel suit, so he was safe. Behavioral Brennan started flying because of the squirrel suit. Middle School Miller saw, but then he didn't tell Linda because Linda was so easily impressed that if she saw, she would immediately leave Middle School Miller. Middle School Miller felt bad and wanted to do something for Linda, so he decided to give her a full gallon of milk. He called Mean Matcha, had lots of cow's milk, and then paid him $5 for the gallon. Linda was so happy. But one person who wasn't happy was Miss Shees. She didn't her milk was being sold, especially for only $5. So Mrs. Shees challenged Linda to a fight. But Mrs. Shees didn't know that Linda was good at boxing. Linda was actually the world champ. Second place, though, was Outgoing Oliver. Outgoing Oliver paid $5 to watch the fight between Linda and Mrs. Shees. Of course, many other citizens also paid $5, including Juicy Jeff. Jeff sold juice, but in his juice boxes, it was really just milk. Mrs. Shees' milk. He made sure to sell each juice box for $5. Creepy Cohen and Middle School Miller were both watching the fight from a hidden camera under the bleachers as they were both in love with Mrs. Shees. Except Creepy Cohen didn't actually love her. Juicy Jeff was smirking at the fight, saying he could do better, even though he couldn't fight. The whole time Ling Landon was alone watching the movie too. To watch the Snyder Cut while Middle School Miller was cell phone, of course. If you don't believe me, ask Creepy Cohen. He is always watching you. Middle School Miller was so sick of Creepy Cohen always watching him, so he took action. He went right up to Creepy Cohen and smacked him. At least he tried to. Miles accidentally slapped Behavioral Brennan. Behavioral Brennan was so mad that he dumped his whole juice box right on a Middle School Miller. Obviously, Middle School Miller couldn't take that level of disrespect, so he poured his juice box on Behavioral Brennan. Soon, everybody was pouring their juice boxes on each other. However, Juicy Jeff was collecting all of the juice that he could. It was so good for his company, he called it recycling. Jeff got an alert on his phone, and it said that there's someone buying so many of his juice boxes that would need to get even more. This person was known as Happy Hayden. He was always so happy, and he would buy anything for $5. But only for $5, no more, no less. 5 was his favorite number. Because he was 5 years old. He has been 5 years old for a couple of years now, and he loves every minute of it. Juicy Jeff, running low on supplies, turned to Mrs. Cheese, hoping to get an IU, but Mrs. Cheese did not want to. She didn't like anyone selling her milk for free. So Juicy Jeff turned to Happy Hayden and asked if he would pay for the milk, but the milk was $5.01, so Hayden didn't buy it. Jeff asked Coupon Cooper for a coupon for Mrs. Cheese's milk, but Coupon Cooper was mad at Jeff for upping his prices, so he didn't. Jeff, not knowing what to do, turned to British Brigham. British Brigham has exactly 4,204,206,969 pounds in his pocket, exactly the amount Jeff needed for one glass of milk. But British Brigham gave Ligma Landon the money to get Behavioral Brennan a glass of Mrs. Cheese's milk, and that made Juicy Jeff sad because, unlike Happy Hayden, he is not always happy. He then went to milking Mary and asked her to milk Mrs. Cheese for him, and she did because she had a big crush on Juicy Jeff. Creepy Cohen changed his name to Killer Cohen and followed milking Mary into the barn. Nobody heard her scream. Mrs. Cheese then backhanded Creepy Cohen in the throat. At least she tried to, but she doesn't have hands, so she couldn't. But Creepy Cohen forgot about the unknown power of the back hoof. He had bruises for many days after that encounter, and Mrs. Cheese was very sad that a milking marriage was not around to milk her anymore, so she let Ligma Landon milk her, but not even Ligma Landon would milk her. But then suddenly, Daring Dan walked in and did it for Ligma Landon. Supposedly, Mrs. Cheese had a flashback. She remembered her childhood back when she was just a young cow. She was born in Germany. Back in Germany, cows weren't eaten as much in America, where Mrs. Cheese was from the day a cow turned 5. They were given $5 and a gallon of juice. but then they had to live on their own. Then Mrs. She started to cry and was very sad remembering her past when life was easy to milk herself. Now she had to have Mean Matt to help her all the time. Even when Mean Matt wasn't there, she had to have Milking Mary. To make things even worse, a couple times she caught Mean Matt and Milking Mary at the juice store together. She was sad that Milking Mary was dead, and she was so jealous of Mean Matt that she started crying again because she had a little bit of depression. Even though Mrs. She's is a cow, she started crying milk. Juicy Jeff saw this opportunity and took it. He started putting juice boxes on Mrs. She's eyes. Unlike Miller, Caked Up Cayman was very caked up. This was all because Creepy Cohen was always baking a chocolate cake to give to Caked Up Cayman. The chocolate cakes were always 3 layers tall. The only downside of this was that Creepy Cohen would always hide himself inside the cake before he gifted it to Caked Up Cayman. Caked Up Cayman always saw this coming, so he decided to replace the cake icing with Elmer's glue. In case y'all didn't know, Elmer's glue is just milk. The milk is made from Mrs. Cheese. That is how Elmer's glue is made. That is the reason the label has a cow on it. That cow is Mrs. Cheese. It's crazy. We all know how surprised you are right now, so don't even try to hide it, you poser. Behavioral Brennan was actually an employee at Elmer Glue. He had no permits, so he made up the name Easygoing Elmer to sneak past security. He sold the glue bottle for $5, but the only person who ever bought the glue was Caked Up Cayman, all because of Creepy Cohen, but Creepy Cohen could only ever make the cake from milk. The milk and glue, I was made from Mrs. Sheesh, so it's her fault that they ever even got into that problem. The only person who helped was Behavioral Brennan, but Mrs. Sheesh was not alone. Juicy Jeff was spying on her and he met. But the even crazier thing is that Juicy Jeff was being watched by Middle School Miller. Middle School Miller wanted to steal all of Juicy Jeff's juice. Jeff was one step ahead of Middle School Miller. So he hired a Hitman Harper. Hitman Harper was beastie buds with No Deal Noah. No Deal Noah was very much a businessman. But whenever anybody said anything to him, his only response was no deal. He ended up getting a job at Shark Tank, but he never partnered with any companies. All he said was no deal. He eventually became a fan favorite, and every time he said no deal, the fans would give him $5. The biggest fan of all was Jiggling Jay. He'd give $5 every single time he went to Shark Tank. By the way, he went to every single Shark Tank episode that featured No Deal Noah, which was about 68. But eventually, Jiggling Jay got tired of Shark Tank and started watching the B-Movie 2. The Zack Snyder cut, of course. British Brigham ran into Jay's bedroom and said, "Don't buy any more Elmer's glue. It's a scam." Easygoing Elmer, which was actually just Behavioral Brennan, made a run for it. Everyone started hunting down Easygoing Elmer. They tried to trick him into eating a cake they put out, but Elmer was smart enough to know that it was a trick. Elmer only had one place to go, Mrs. Sheez's house. Mrs. Sheez was the only person that was still on Elmer's side. So she knew it was Elmer when she heard the knock. This was because they had a secret knock, which was just one loud one. So they let them in, and then they got on the bed and did the dirty stuff. The bed got dirty because they spilled some Elmer's glue, which they loved to do. However, one person who didn't love it was Useful Ezra. He got so mad whenever anyone spilled any Elmer's glue. Was also very mad at Coupon Cooper because he used coupons instead of always paying $5. Useful Ezra was so mad that he randomly attacked Milking Mary. But Milking Mary milked so much that she was pretty strong, so she ended up winning the big fight. At the end of the day, the two set aside their differences and watched She-Hulk. After a long day of watching She-Hulk in polite society, Ezra only had to make a statement. I passed out of obesity, said, "Useful Ezra." Everyone that had heard that instantly stood up and high-fived Useful Ezra. Since Ezra was getting all this attention, Outgoing Oliver got really jealous, so he knew that the best way for him to get attention was obviously to run for mayor. Outgoing Oliver has my vote. He shouted everyone around. Even She-Hulk was planning to vote for Outgoing Oliver. Some people wondered why everyone liked him so much, but this was obviously because of how outgoing he was. So Joseph Biden, random guy, was planning to sabotage the election by blowing up the Elmer's glue factory, so the glue would become a tsunami, then no one could make it out. As it burst through the Shark Tank doors and glued No Deal Noah to the ground. Sadly, it had killed Kevin O'Leary. Surprisingly, our Michael Morbius was the only one to attend his funeral. Ligma Landon was watching live. In a Ligma Landon said, "Ha ha 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 ha." The glue dried, and No Deal Noah was removed by crane. Mrs. Cheese was disappointed. In the end, they went to the movie theater where Jiggling Jay worked and watched B-Movie. To Zack Snyder, cuts out, Schneider was Jiggling Jay's pen man.